It's an international conference, I think it's okay. So my name is Victor Okunev, and my hometown is Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I'm developer evangelist, so my role is to connect the world of Android APIs and Android tools that Samsung provides with the developers. And my colleague Alexei, he is from Samsung R&D office in Moscow. And today we're gonna talk about desktop user experience in Android. One of the things that I'd like to make an announcement. Still fiddling with the clicker. So at the end of the presentation, we'll be doing a quiz. Basically, it's a quiz, about 12 questions based on everything we're going to talk about. And the winner is going to take home DeckStation. And please show me who actually knows about DeckStation, what it is. Okay, so hopefully at the end of the presentation, we'll have 100% of people kind of having a rough idea what it is. And our colleagues from Samsung Electronic Office in Kiev, they also provided S8 device, which we're also going to put on quiz. So one of you guys is going to walk away with this set that you'll be able to immediately use and experience the world of Android desktop user experience. So let's go ahead and start. The first question is why we even gonna discuss this topic? Why is it relevant, desktop experience in Android? So one thing why we like our mobile devices, and that's actually my mobile device that I placed on a desktop. So it's a little visual pun. So the reason why we like our mobile devices is because they're immediately available. The minute you need your Android phone, you just pop it from the pocket and it's ready for you. Just press a button and you can go ahead and start using it. However, when you need to do something a bit more elaborate, specifically coding, we tend to use desktop operating systems, right? We need to use physical peripheral devices like mouse and a keyboard, just because we're, a bit more productive in that case. It's probably kind of difficult to find a developer who writes a code on their mobile devices, right? Because, just using a soft keyboard is not really that practical. So, on one side we have availability, on the other side we have productivity. And the question is it possible to actually marry these two worlds together to have instantly available device and yet achieve productivity? And the answer, yes, it is possible. And it actually became possible about a year ago when Google released Android SDK 24, also known as Android Nougat. And that's where they added a multi-window support to core Android API. And in fact, you can actually use a multi-window functionality on your Android device. If you just take your device without any additional hardware, you can open a multi-window interface in two different ways. This is called freeform, and you can also use a split window interface. And it actually works on every Android phone that runs Android N and later. But let me ask you this. Who actually used this feature on your Android devices? And surprisingly, not that many, because this doesn't actually solve the problem. Yeah, it helps a bit to have multiple windows, but those windows are tiny, right? And even using drag and drop with your finger is not really that practical. So there's basically a gap between the software that's already that already exist to support multi-window environment, and the actual hardware that presents you with that environment. So this is where Samsung DeX steps in. And I just want to stress that everything that we're going to talk about today is not unique to Samsung. We're not trying to talk about some kind of proprietary technology that you can only achieve using Samsung devices. This is coming to Android world. And Samsung just happened to be the first company who actually provided the hardware that's called DeckStation and the software. So basically, when you plug in your mobile device to a DeckStation, magically, your Android environment turns to something like this. What really happens, we replace the launcher. From mobile Android launcher, we launch something that looks like a normal desktop operating system that has everything that typical desktop operating system has. It has a list of application icons, recent apps, notification bar, pretty much everything. It fully supports mouse and keyboard interaction. And one of the unique features of this environment is that it's actually integrated with telephony, which is a huge bonus. Imagine, try to receive an SMS message on your notebook. That wouldn't be possible, right? But in this desktop environment, you can actually, use both the desktop operating system and the telephony, which kind of helps you to, perform some additional use cases. For example, I can copy and paste my SMS message to my PowerPoint presentation or email, something like that. And one of the best way, of course, is to experience something like a desktop operating system, desktop operating environment. And this is exactly what we're going to do. All I have to do basically is to hit escape button, provided my keyboard is actually working. Let me see. Alexei, can you check the keyboard? It's a live demo, guys. It's always try to use different batteries. Okay, while Alexei is helping us with the keyboard, so some of the questions that may come to your mind is, okay, does it work? Excellent. Okay, so basically all we have to do to show you how it works is to hit the escape button and exit the PowerPoint presentation, because we're actually presenting from my work phone. This is the whole setup. I just using my work phone. In case if there's any internal messages from Samsung, please ignore, because they're supposed to be strictly confidential. So that's basically Android, guys, believe it or not. And one thing that I usually trying to do, let's say that we want to build some, we can actually build a little application together. And usually when we start working on a software project, I put my headphones on and I just listen to background music. Well, we can't listen to background music here, so let's put a background video. And let's pick some neutral subject as kittens, because everyone likes kittens. And so let them play for a time being. And on top of the kittens, we're going to open what's called IDE. AIDE, it's Android Integrated Development Environment. It is it's actually an Android application that's been developed in Germany. And this is a really full-featured Android IDE. You can basically write code. And not only you can write code, you can build your app and you can deploy it right on the same device, which is kind of cool. You don't need a notebook for that. So in this case, we have basically a simple application I put together. It's a memo pad. It's kind of like a simple textual editor, but I'm just going to illustrate a certain optimization features in your application using that memo pad as an example. So let's go ahead and build it. It actually works faster than Android Studio on my notebook, believe it or not. So right away you can install it, and here's the memo pad. I'll probably see it because it's easier to. Okay, so let's observe a few things. Let's minimize this. One thing to notice is that our kittens are still playing. See? Remember how if you play YouTube video on a mobile device and then you put another application on top of it, it stops. Well, it doesn't have to stop. Basically, it's not some kind of magic. It's intended behavior that's been implemented in the on-pause callback method, right? The developers just assume that if your app is being covered by another application, there's probably no reason to continue playing video. Well, not so much in a multi-window environment, because in a multi-window you can still see maybe a little bit of background application, and so as a developer, the guys who actually put together the YouTube app, they decided that in a desktop environment, they're not going to pause their video. And so that's one thing that you may consider, in terms of optimizing your app. So let's close the kittens, because that was the actually reason why I used them. So right out of box, you have support to all of the popular keyboard shortcuts. For example, I can click Ctrl-A, Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, Ctrl-Z. So all that works. So this is basically just edit view. And without any specific efforts, all these shortcuts work right away. Also, mouse functionality works. All these menu items, they actually come right out of the box, supported by core Android. But in both cases, you can actually customize. You can add custom keyboard shortcuts. So for example, I chose to implement Ctrl plus and Ctrl minus to do the keyboard-based zoom. See, this is Ctrl plus, Ctrl minus. So that's a custom keyboard shortcut. And I also decided to implement a custom mouse contextual menu. So for example, I can put my app in so-called immersive mode. In immersive mode, you can get rid of all these, extra window surroundings. And this is probably the most popular mode with the game developers, because, when you play a game, you don't want to see, the taskbar and anything else. That's called immersive mode. But to enable it, I actually put, additional. Where's my app? So to enable it, I actually put additional code to my application to support the shortcuts. And so when you optimize your application for a desktop environment, make sure that you actually add additional support for the keyboard and the mouse, because your users are going to use it, because there's really no way for any of the finger gestures, right? Because you can't possibly, touch this screen, for example. Another functionality that somehow unique for a desktop Android UX. That's not something I wanted here. Let's go to UA mobile website. And where is it? Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, come on. All right, it doesn't actually matter. The point is, I'm trying to open any web page at this point and just show you the drag and drop. Okay, let's just select some text. Okay, and let's drop it to this text pad. So as you can see, drag and drop works. And again, this functionality comes supported right out of box. And again, you can actually, since drag and drop is really helping with the productivity, you can actually choose to implement a custom drag and drop. So for example, let's open my files and do a custom drag and drop. Internal storage. Documents. So let's try to drag and drop this textual file. So as you can see, what actually happened, I dropped the textual file and I opened it content and inserted the content into my application. And this is basically, this is the implementation. All I had to do is to create a drag listener and check the MIME type of the item that's being dropped to my edit view. And if it's a file, I basically just open the file, read the text, and append it to the edit view. That's it. Again, this is, I'm using the core Android API, nothing proprietary here. And I think that's pretty much all we wanted to show at this point. There'll be another demo. Okay, so let's move to this slide. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, so how is it relevant to my users? Is this do I have to do anything about making my applications work, in a desktop environment? Is this a proprietary technology? Like, is it only going to be useful for Samsung users? How much effort does it take? So some of these questions you basically need to answer to yourself. For example, what kind of users use your mobile application? But one thing we actually need to notice is that this user experience is coming and it's quickly becoming mainstream. So just as in 2008, first Android phone became available, it came from HTC Dream. Maybe some of you guys remember it. It was running Android 1.6. And a couple of years after, we were presented with another step in Android user experience. Suddenly, we were provided with a tablet environment. So there were some efforts to make our applications work well in the tablets, right? Because suddenly we had, extra space, and we could actually use that extra space, we could put some different functionality and optimize user interface. And just to continue this kind of set of milestones in Android user experience, this is where we get, this is the era of Android desktop UX. And again, Currently, it's available from Samsung devices and from a few other devices that I'm going to mention here as well. But the point is, this is coming. And in a year or so, your users are going to plug their Android phones to a large screen. And it's really up to you how your app actually behaves and works on that large screen. What you really want to do as a developer, and by the way, this is another device that supports that provides Android desktop UX, Chromebook, and I have it with me today. If we'll have time, we'll plug it in, and I'll show you how it works. And by the way, we actually work in pretty tight collaboration with Google team to make sure that when you optimize your app for a desktop environment in Android, it works well both on Samsung DeX and on a Chromebook. So what you really want to build, and provide your users when they plug their phone to a large screen is something like this. This is actually an example of Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Excel applications. Look at them. They actually look pretty similar to how they look on PC or Mac, right? You can see menu bar at the top, something that a typical Android app doesn't have. And they just, look like normal desktop apps. If you don't optimize your application for a desktop environment, it's going to look like a mobile app on a big screen. You see the difference, right? And so this is what we're trying to change. We're trying to be able to optimize our app so when it's presented with a desktop environment, it switches to a desktop mode. And there's a couple of tricks that, things that you need to consider when you do that. So at this point, I'll pass, not yet. So let's talk about these tricks. So for one, you have extra real estate on a screen. You have additional screen space, so you may choose to use it wisely. For example, you can add a companion view, something like a navigator pane, which is always helpful and increase productivity as well. Since you have, again, more screen space, you're no longer restricted to short messages. You can use more elaborate messages and show them to your users. You may consider, adding a menu bar to your screen, again, because it's really easy to look at the menu bar and understand the supported functionality by the application. You also need to remember that your users are no longer constrained with either portrait or landscape orientation of your app, because your users will be resizing your application to, landscape and portrait and square, and they can stretch it to a vertical column or horizontal, bar, and your layouts should handle all that gracefully. Here's an example. Of an internal Samsung app. So it's one of our teams. They were basically building an application to support, our sales team. And when they deployed their application to a desktop environment, this is how it looked. As you can see, the tabs at the top, they were bunching together when they were shrinking resizing the screen, making it smaller. This area didn't align properly. And that's just because they were building this app for a tablet environment. They never tested it in a desktop. And this is what happened when you just plug an optimized app to a large screen. And so as developers, you really want to avoid these situations. When your users, plug their Samsung phone or, deploy your application on a Chromebook, or probably in a year or so, other manufacturers will actually provide the same functionality. You don't want your users to experience something like this. You want to be prepared and handle a large screen gracefully. So the specifics, the new challenges come with adding functionality that's specific for a desktop environment, specifically support for physical peripherals like mouse and a keyboard, shortcuts. Like in my case, I implemented Control plus, Control minus. That was a customization. You can actually, as I already noticed, customize the drag and drop and make it really complex. You can consider use cases when you use a combination of keyboard and the mouse functionality. Actually, in my keypad application, I can hold a control key and use a mouse wheel to zoom in and zoom out. And that's also a custom behavior. You can create elaborate pop-up menus because, again, no longer you are constrained with little screen. You can actually go really elaborate. And remember that there's no gestures. If your app heavily relies on gestures, you actually need to seriously reconsider your user interface because now it's mouse and a keyboard, no gestures. In fact, if in your manifest file you'll say that my app requires a touch screen, it won't even launch in desk mode. Okay. So fortunately, even though it's kind of a new evolution of user experience, we use all the same good proven best practices, like using density pixels instead of physical pixels. We use alternate layouts and alternate resources like drawables and screens and strings. We, just like before, we have to handle runtime configuration changes. Perhaps you remember when when you turn your phone from landscape to portrait, your activity will get terminated and relaunched, right? Well, desktop mode adds a couple of new configuration changes that you need to consider handling. So every time when a user resizes your application, configuration change takes place. It's actually your activity is being relaunched. Every time when you maximize your activity, again, it's a configuration change. Every time when you dock and undock the phone from, well, in this case, DeckStation, it's another configuration change. What's the most important part about handling configuration change? Well, you have to preserve the state of your app, right? But again, this is nothing new. It's an old good practice. Be smart about on pause. Remember, like, in the example with the kittens, perhaps you may consider not stopping your video playback or, stopping your background activity because in the multi-window world, it's a bit different. And just like before, to provide alternate layouts and drawables and strings, all we have to do is to use proper configuration qualifiers. So this is perhaps a new qualifier that you haven't had a chance to use before, desk. So when your phone recognizes that it's actually running in a desktop mode, the Android operating system will pick the resource folder with the desk qualifier. And this is something that you'll probably need for the quiz. This is about this particular DeckStation. And again, this is just enabling hardware from Samsung. I think pretty soon other vendors will provide similar functionality. So this is why we actually talk about this technology, because as developers, we need to get ready. But in this particular instance, we have DeckStation that provides 2 USB ports that you can basically plug anything that Android hardware supports. You can plug a radio receiver for the wireless keyboard and mouse, or you can plug your clicker or external USB camera. We have Ethernet port, which makes this particular device is very attractive to enterprise users because in the office environment, Ethernet works much faster. We have HDMI out port. Currently, it supports FHD, full HD resolution. And currently, these are the 3 devices that actually work with DeckStation: S8, S8 Plus, and Note 8. All Samsung flagship devices. So we'll have the Q&A, questions and answer session after this presentation, but generally these are the questions that we historically being asked the most often. Is there any way to detect in my application if I'm in a desktop mode? Like, for example, when you implement on pause callback, you may, put a check. If I'm in a desktop mode, then perhaps I shouldn't, stop my video playback. There's a couple of ways of doing it. You can either implement a broadcast receiver and receive a broadcast, every time when your phone being plugged or unplugged from a DeckStation, or you can query a configuration object, Android configuration object. Again, it's from core Android API. Another question: is there any way to predefine the dimensions of my launch window? So when your users launch your activity, sometimes you would like, instead of using default window size for your activity, sometimes you would like to preset it to a certain dimensions. Yes, it's possible. You can do it through a manifest or, again, programmatically. And another question that's probably my favorite. Well, since your phone is plugged into the DeckStation, is it possible to debug your app without taking the phone out? Because technically you think, well, to deploy an app, you kind of have to take it out from the DeckStation, connect it to your notebook, with the USB cable, deploy your app, then put the phone back. You actually don't have to bother, because you can use the ADB functionality that makes ADB reachable through Wi-Fi or Ethernet. It's basically just a few commands, and suddenly you can deploy your apps over the network to the phone that still sits in the DeckStation. So that's quite convenient. And if you would like to know where you can read about all this technology and maybe refresh your knowledge of multi-window support in Android in general, these are the links. As you can see, the top 2 links, they basically come from Android Developer Guide, right? The third link, it comes from, there's a developer support site on Samsung.com, and this is where we actually put together a guide. My colleagues from Vancouver actually did that. We put together a guide that step by step kind of walks you through the optimization steps of your application. So at this point, everything that we've talked about, it was relevant to you as developers because of your users. Because your users will be using their Android phones in a desktop environment. But there's another reason why you might be interested in a desktop UX as a developer. And that reason, I would like to ask Alexei to come on stage and show you yet another interesting use case.
Hello, everyone. Maybe you know, at previous Samsung Developer Conference was introduced something called Linux on Galaxy. Show me hands who heard about it. Okay, 2 people. Not so much, and I'm going to show you a short demo how it looks. Let me change device. So few seconds, too loud. Okay. Actually, Linux on Dex on Galaxy is a true Linux run on Android. How it looks UI. So now for demo, it's only one option, Ubuntu, but you in future can add your own Linux builds or choose from pre-deployed. So let's start how it looks. And you can see a familiar Ubuntu UI and some pre-installed application. For example, I run IntelliJ IDEA. So it's IDE that you can use in your Android phone and develop application in your device. So as you can see, it's the same IDE that okay. Okay, you can run, for example, Java application because GDK also exists. And now I want to show you terminal because it's still Linux and you're able to use features of Linux, for example, apt-get. Let me show. For example, Tomcat. And yes, it's already installed, and let me run it. Okay. So let's check how it works. Run a browser and type localhost. Okay. So it works. And now we would like to stop terminal. Yes, where is it? And refresh. Yeah, it doesn't work now. And so now it's just a demo, and if you want to try it, you can just link so okay, I'm type scap samsung.com links on Galaxy page, and fill the form, and when it will be available for test, I'm show you a link again. Okay. So that's all.
Let's thank you, Alexei. So I hope that was interesting. And at this point, we're basically running out of time. So let's do our draw our quiz, as we promised. Okay, so basically, let me just yeah. So at this point, we are basically at the slide where we can go ahead and run our quiz. So let me show you how it actually works. Pretty simple. So get your phones ready, guys, because it's basically online quiz. So all you have to do is to go to kahoot.it and in your browser and enter this game pin. And just give it any name. You don't have to provide your email or whatever. And once you register, your name will appear on this area. Yeah. And I'll give you a minute to register, and then we'll start our quiz. And this is the main prize that we're gonna award to a person who not only answers all the questions correctly, but also whoever will answer them the fastest. So the faster you click the right answer, the more chances you have to get the prize. Okay, 23 players. Anybody else? $25. Okay. 15 more seconds. Okay, are you guys ready? Okay, so while you're finishing the registration, one thing I didn't tell you, and that's important for the quiz, who heard about Samsung Knox? Okay, not so many. So Samsung Knox is basically a secure platform that we put on our flagship devices, and that makes a certain, it enforces certain security aspects on the device that makes it specifically attractive for the enterprises and B2B environment. And very frequently we are being asked the question, does Knox work with DeX, in the desktop environment? And the answer is all the security features of Knox do work. Like, for example, if somebody will try to replace a bootloader on your phone, or if somebody will try to root your phone, then, for example, your key store will be pretty much physically inaccessible, and things like that. Okay, so there'll be a question, does Knox work with DeX? So basically, again, it's all the security features of Knox work. There's certain features of Knox that affect user interface. They may not necessarily work with in the desktop mode. Okay, let's go ahead and start. So just read the question and hit the proper area on your screens. Yes, we actually are not trying to replace laptops because there's still a really good reason to use laptops and even desktop computers. We're basically just trying to provide a new desktop experience to mobile users. Okay, great. So we have our leader. So what port does the DeX station doesn't have? Yeah, there's no firewire. So you actually were listening. That's good. Okay, we have a change of leaders. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, SDK 24, because that's when the multi-window support for Android has been enabled. Okay. To be able to resize the app window in DeX, you need to. You actually do have to declare resizable activity equals true. Perhaps that's not very intuitive, but that's what you have to do. Okay, next question. This is something we've talked about. Yes, so if you ask for explicitly for a touchscreen support in your app, it's not going to work in desktop mode. Well, at least with the DeX station. Okay, change of leaders again. Next question. Well, so the correct question is that you don't have to do anything mandatory to make your app compatible with DeX, because you may add some custom keyboard and mouse handlers, but generally speaking, your application will work with the keyboard and mouse right out of box. Okay, next question. Yeah, so the mouse wheel zoom is not a out-of-box behavior, so you actually have to provide a custom listener. Control plus. Remember I showed you the custom zoom, Control plus, Control minus. That was the custom shortcut, and it doesn't work out of box, off the shelf with DeX. So that was in one of the slides, the density resource qualifier. Guys, desk is not a density resource qualifier. MDPI is. Though desk is a right qualifier, but it's not about the screen density, right? Yeah, that was a trap, and you fell for it. Okay, getting closer to the end. Yes, when you minimize your app, then there's no runtime configuration change. And the last question. That should be easy. Yes, so all the security features of Nox work. Some of them that affect user interface, they don't work. Okay, so that's it, guys, and we have a winner. Naba, well, please come on stage. Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Dima. I'm an Android developer. I'm from Cherkasy. That's all.
Well, congratulations. This is yours now, and we'll need to do some paperwork after the presentation. So at this point, guys, we open the floor to questions, even though it's a bit past the end of the session time. But if you have any questions, please fire up.
Hi, my name is Oleg. It's mostly a question to Samsung DeX. What about performance? Everything is very nice, smooth, and whatever, but the main reason and why to use and the main thing that might prevent us from being using this is some users' performance. Is there any
That's actually a good question. So perhaps you know that attempts to implement something like this have been performed in the past, right? There were multiple vendors that were trying to, because this is really a technology that's just very logical to implement. And I think what we believe in Samsung that the reason why this attempt is going to succeed because the hardware is actually at the point, when the processor power is sufficient to support, well, at least most of the office tasks. And as you can see, we can, build our Android apps as well. Perhaps you won't be able to render, videos as efficiently as you would do on, on a desktop, but video playback is pretty smooth, and you can play video and build your apps. So performance actually, perhaps this is the reason why we enable DeX on only Samsung flagship devices like S8, S8 Plus, and Note. Perhaps, a hardware that has less computing, power is not very ready for that. So I think the users will vote with their dollars to see whether or not this effort will be successful, but we believe that we're on the right track. Yes, please. Can we get the mic, please?
Previously, it was shown that we can launch Ubuntu and Android Studio in it, but can we build a project and run it in Samsung DeX?
So I don't think Android Studio is actually working on Linux at this time, right? So
actually it's work on Linux, but in the demo I run just IntelliJ and GDK. It works now, but not Android Studio. Android Studio will work.
But technically speaking, you can build an APK file and copy it to the file system on your Android device and then install it. Well, it's hard to answer at this point because I don't think we have binaries for Android Studio on Linux.
Yeah, because question is that Linux on ARM chipset, and not all the software have completed binary for ARM chipset, but there's some work to bring it to Android hardware.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Another mic?
What about data transferring between Linux and Android? About file transferring. Could I access to the file in the Linux from my Android app and vice versa?
Yeah, because it's actually true Linux, the function to mount external resources. And for example, you can mount internal resources of storage of device. So you can use same space. Actually, in Linux on Galaxy have own namespace, but also you can mount storage, Android storage. Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming to our presentation. I hope that that was helpful. So please start thinking about optimizing your apps for Android user desktop experience. Thank you, guys.
Хвилинку уваги. Зараз у нас час для обіду, тому ті, хто має на зворотньому боці бейджика такий значок, це означає обід, може підніматися на другий поверх і проходити там, де був кофі-брейк, на обід. Хто не має, для тих, тут є атмосфера, це на першому поверсі, проходите далі і там, будь ласка, обід.